The high desert sun punished the earth, bleaching the bones of the land. And there, lashed to a punishment post of splintered wood, was an Apache woman, left to die. When the cowboy cut her free, he had no idea 30 warriors were watching from the Mesa Ridge, their judgment resting on his single act of mercy. This was the harsh justice of the high plains during the Apache Wars, a time when survival was a brutal calculus. The woman was a captive from a rival band. The cowboy was just passing through, but his decision to intervene would now be weighed by a hidden council, determining if he would leave this canyon alive or be buried in it. The cowboy was Elias Beckett, a man running from more than just the law. He was headed for the Mexican border, a fugitive from a botched cattle deal in Texas that left 2 men dead. The woman at the post was Chuli, a healer from the Chiricahua band, accused of poisoning a rival warrior's son. Her punishment was not just death, but a test. This was the year 1879, deep in the Dragoon Mountains of Arizona Territory. The Apache Wars had raged for 3 decades, a grinding conflict of ambush and reprisal between the United States cavalry and the bands who refused confinement on the desolate San Carlos reservation. But this conflict was internal, a matter of tribal law. Chuli's own people had condemned her. The evidence was circumstantial. A child fell sick after she administered herbs for a fever. The boy's father, a hot-headed warrior named Goyale, known for his fierce temper, demanded blood price. The band's elder, a man named Nanton, proposed a different justice. They would stake her out under the sun, a sentence of exposure. But Nanton had a second, secret purpose. He believed the old ways were being poisoned by the desperation of constant war. He wanted to see if any trace of compassion remained in this brutal land, even in the heart of an enemy. So he ordered 30 of his best men to conceal themselves on the surrounding ridges. They were to watch the punishment post. If any outsider, Mexican, American, even a rival Apache, showed mercy and cut Chuli down, they were not to attack immediately. They were to observe, to judge the stranger's intent. For 2 days, Chuli endured. The sun blistered her skin, thirst clawed at her throat. On the morning of the 3rd day, as delirium began to set in, she saw a lone rider picking his way through the canyon below. It was Elias Beckett. Elias saw the vultures first, dark specks circling lazily against the hard blue sky, a sure sign of death or something dying. His first instinct, honed by years of looking out for himself, was to turn his horse and ride the other way. Trouble was the last thing he needed. A posse from Fort Huachuca could be on his trail, but something made him nudge his tired mare forward, up the rocky incline. What he found shocked him. He'd seen harsh justice before, lynchings in Texas, army floggings, but this was different. The deliberate, slow cruelty of it struck a nerve he didn't know he had. Without conscious thought, he drew his Bowie knife and sawed through the rough hemp ropes binding her wrists. Chuli collapsed into the dust, too weak to stand. Elias fetched his canteen, trickling precious water onto her cracked lips and over her forehead. He was so focused on this act of basic humanity that he never scanned the high rocks. He didn't see the 30 pairs of eyes watching his every move. He didn't see Nanton, the old elder, studying the care with which Elias handled the woman, nodding that the cowboy took nothing from her, asked for nothing. On the ridge, a debate began in hushed Apache. Goyale, the grieving father, gripped his rifle. "He touches what is ours. He interrupts our justice. Let me kill them both." But Nanton placed a hand on the warrior's arm. "Wait, see what he does next." A thief or a lustful man would have acted differently. This one, his action is clean. Down in the basin, Elias faced a new problem. He couldn't leave her. She would die within hours. But taking her with him meant slowing his desperate flight to Mexico to a crawl. Every hour mattered. The sound of every distant coyote yip could be a pursuing sheriff's scout. He made a choice that would seal his fate. He lifted Chuli onto his horse, climbed up behind her, and turned south, away from his planned route, seeking any semblance of shelter. The warriors on the ridge tracked them, moving like ghosts through the rocks, keeping parallel to the stumbling horse. Elias found a shallow cave as the sun began to set. He built a small fire, used salt pork and a handful of cornmeal to make a thin broth, and tried to feed the unconscious woman. He was a wanted man nursing a woman he believed was wanted by her own people. The irony was lost on him. All he knew was a profound, exhausting loneliness had been briefly interrupted by this burden. That night, under a blanket of cold stars, Chuli's fever broke. She awoke to see the stranger sleeping fitfully by the dying fire, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. She saw the weariness etched into his young face, the dirt-stained clothes of a man on the run. And she saw her people's observation marks, a specific arrangement of 3 stones near the cave entrance, a sign only another Apache would recognize. Her heart stuttered. They were watching. This was Nanton's test. And this white man had unknowingly passed its first, deadly stage. At dawn, Elias awoke to find her awake, watching him. Her eyes were dark and clear. She spoke in halting Spanish, the trading language of the borderlands. "You should not have done this. They are watching, the warriors." Elias sat bolt upright, his hand going to his gun. He peered out at the silent, pink-tinted canyon. "How many?" he whispered. "Many," Chuli replied. "They let you take me. This is not their way. Unless—" She fell silent, a terrifying hope dawning in her expression. "Unless it was a test, and you are still alive." Before Elias could process this, the sound of a single horse approaching echoed through the canyon. Not a charge, but a slow, deliberate walk. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the rising sun. It was not Goyale, but Nanton himself. He held no weapon. He stopped 50 yards from the cave and dismounted, standing in the open, waiting. Elias stepped out, his rifle in hand. The old man called out in clear, if accented English, "You have the woman, you tended her. Why?" Elias' mind raced. Every lie he'd ever told, to lawmen, to partners, to himself, seemed useless here. He spoke the raw, unfiltered truth. Because it was wrong. No one deserves to die like that. Nanton studied him for a long minute. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Then you will come with us. You will stand before the band. You will answer for the life you have taken into your hands, and you will face the one who wanted her dead." It was not an invitation. It was a verdict. From the rocks all around, the 30 warriors stood up, revealing themselves. They were silent, encircling the cave. Elias Beckett, the fugitive, was no longer running from the law. He was caught in the grip of a justice far older and far more absolute. And he had just been ordered to walk directly into the heart of the enemy camp. The march to the Apache camp was a silent, terrifying procession. Elias walked, leading his horse which carried Chuli. The 30 warriors formed a moving perimeter around them, their eyes never leaving the pair. It was not the journey of a prisoner, but of a curiosity, a man being delivered to a judgment he could not possibly understand. They traveled for hours into a labyrinth of high canyons. Elias memorized the route instinctively, a habit from his days running from passes, but he knew it was futile. These men knew every shadow of this land. Finally, they descended into a hidden valley, green with a spring-fed creek and dotted with wickiups, domed shelters of brush and hide. This was Nanton's band, perhaps 60 people in total, a fragment of the Chiricahua holding onto freedom. As they entered, every activity stopped. Women paused at their grinding stones. Children froze in their games. Old men looked up from their repairs. All eyes were on the white man and the woman he had saved. The silence was heavier than any shouted threat. Nanton led them to the center of the camp, a cleared circle of packed earth. He gestured for Elias to sit. Chuli was helped from the horse by 2 older women who took her away to a wickiup, their faces unreadable. Elias was left alone in the circle, the entire band gathering around its edge. Then a man pushed through the crowd. Goyale. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He spoke directly to Nanton in Apache, his voice sharp. Nanton listened, then translated for Elias. "He says you have stolen his justice. The woman's life was forfeit. By touching her, you have taken a debt onto yourself. Do you understand this?" Elias, his heart pounding against his ribs, shook his head. I understand she was dying. I couldn't leave her. Goyale spat into the dust at Elia's feet. He barked more words. Nanton's translation was calm, but the meaning was electric. He says your sense of right and wrong means nothing here. You are a stranger, a thief in our land. He believes you took her for yourself as a slave or a woman. He challenges you to answer for this. A challenge. Elias knew what that meant on the frontier. A fight. To the death. He was a good shot and a decent brawler, but against a seasoned Apache warrior in the middle of his own camp. It was a death sentence dressed up as honor. But then Nanton spoke again, this time to the whole band. His voice carried a weary authority. He spoke for a long time. Elias understood none of the words, but he saw the effect. Some faces hardened, agreeing with Goyale. Others looked thoughtful, even doubtful. The women, in particular, watched with intense, focused eyes. When Nanton finished, he turned back to Elias. I have told them of the test. I have told them my warriors watched for 2 days. No one came. No Mexican vaquero, no American prospector, no cavalry scout. Only you. You saw the vultures and you came asterisk toward them. You cut her down. You gave her water from your own canteen. You fed her when you thought no one saw. These are the acts of a man with a straight heart or a very foolish one. He paused, letting the assessment hang in the air. But Goyale's pain is also straight. His son is dead. He believes Chuli's medicine killed him. Our way requires his pain to be answered. So now we have a new question. Why does a white man with a fast horse and a fear in his eyes stop for an Apache woman? Elias felt the walls closing in. His past, the 2 dead men in Texas, the wanted posters, all of it was a coiled snake in his gut. To lie here felt impossible. The old man's gaze seemed to see straight through him. He took a deep breath. I told you because it was wrong. That is not enough, Nanton said softly. Many wrong things happen every day. Men walk past them, why not you? The true answer rose up in Elias, bitter and unbidden. It wasn't about nobility. It was about a memory. The image of his own younger sister, Sarah, dying of fever in a squalid wagon when he was just a boy, helpless to save her. Seeing Chuli lashed to that post had ripped that scar wide open. He couldn't save Sarah. Maybe, in some twisted way, he could save this stranger. He didn't say any of that. Instead, another truth tumbled out. Because I'm tired, Elias said, his voice low. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of looking at every man as an enemy. I saw her, and for once the enemy wasn't a person. It was that post, the sun. It was simple. I could fight that. Nanton studied him, then translated a condensed version for the crowd. The reaction was murmurs, not shouts. This was not a language of grand speeches, but of actions, and his actions had been witnessed by 30 men. Then a new voice spoke. Chuli had emerged from the wickiup, cleaned and supported by the women. She was frail, but her voice was clear. She spoke to the assembly in Apache. She spoke for several minutes, her tone pleading, then firm. She gestured to Elias, then to her own heart. When she finished, Nanton translated for Elias, and his words sent a chill down the cowboy's spine. She says she did not poison the boy. The herbs were correct. She believes the boy was sick with the white man's sickness, the smallpox that has been creeping into the camps from the reservation. The blisters were inside his throat. She could not cure that. She says the real poison is the despair that makes us accuse our own healers. And she says this man, Nanton pointed at Elias, acted as a healer. He offered water, food, shelter. He fought the sickness of cruelty. In our way, a healer's life is sacred. To kill the one who saved a healer, this would bring great disharmony. The camp erupted into debate. Goyale was on his feet, shouting. Nanton raised his hands for silence, but the tension was now a live wire crackling through the valley. Nanton made a decision. He announced that Elias would remain. He would be given a place to sleep, under watch but not bound. The band would counsel further. The matter was not settled. For Elias, captivity in an Apache camp was a surreal nightmare. He was given a space near the creek, away from the main wickiups. 2 young warriors, not much older than boys, were assigned to watch him. They didn't speak to him, but they didn't threaten him either. They were guards and curious observers in equal measure. Over the next 2 days, a strange routine developed. Elias helped fetch water, not because he was ordered to, but because idleness was torture. The women began to nod to him, a slight, cautious acknowledgement. The children would dare each other to creep close, then run away giggling when he looked at them. Julie recovered slowly. She would sit in the sun outside her wickiup, and sometimes her eyes would meet Elias across the camp. A silent understanding passed between them. They were both on trial. On the third evening, Nanton came to him alone. He sat by the small fire Elias was allowed. "You wonder why I made this test," the old man said, not waiting for an answer. "My daughter, Daklogy, was taken by Mexican soldiers 5 winters ago. She was 15. They did not stake her out. They did something worse in their fort. Then they threw her body into a canyon. I sent scouts to watch that canyon for weeks. I wanted to see if any Mexican, any white man would find her and show her dignity, would bury her. No one did. The coyotes and the buzzards did their work. I saw that the world outside our mountains had no heart left. It was a desert." He poked the fire with a stick. "Then this sickness comes, and fear comes, and Goyale wants to kill a woman for failing to cure the uncurable. I saw we were becoming like the world that killed my daughter, all heart drying up, so I set the test, not for her, for us, to see if the desert had any water left in it." He looked directly at Elias. "You are the first drop of rain in a long drought, Elias Beckett, but one drop is not enough to break a drought. It can be swallowed by the hot earth and forgotten." The next morning, the fragile peace shattered. A scout rode into camp at a gallop, shouting. Nanton called the men together. Elias, from his spot by the creek, saw the grave faces. He caught the word Pindalikoi, the Apache term for white men, and soldiers. The scout had seen a cavalry patrol, about 20 strong, cutting sign about 10 miles east. They were following a trail, his asterisk trail. The posse from Fort Huachuca had picked up his flight and, by incredible bad luck, had been drawn toward the Apache camp by the same signs of life his pursuers had followed. Panic surged in Elias. If the soldiers found this camp, a battle was inevitable. Women and children would die. His attempt to save one life would doom dozens, and Goyale saw his chance. The warrior strode to the center of the camp and pointed a furious finger at Elias. His rant was loud and unequivocal. Nanton, his face grim, translated the essence for Elias. "He says you led death to our home. You are a scout for the cavalry or their bait. Your mercy was a trick. He says the test is over. The only answer now is blood." The camp, once divided, now swayed. Fear of the cavalry was a unifying terror. Eyes that had been curious turned hard and suspicious. Nanton was caught. His belief in the test clashed with the survival of his people. He had to make a choice, and it was written in the sorrow on his face. He spoke to the band, his voice heavy. Then he turned to Elias. "Goyale's challenge stands, but the terms have changed. He says if you are not a scout, if you are just a man, you will fight him. Not with guns, which would bring the soldiers running, but with the knife. Here, now. If you win, you and Chuli may leave. We will distract the soldiers, lead them away. If you lose..." Nanton did not finish. He didn't need to. It was a brutal, elegant solution for the band. It would resolve the internal conflict. It would vent Goyale's rage. And it would decisively answer the question of Elias' heart, with his blood or with his strength. Elias looked at the ring of faces, at Chuli's horrified expression, at Goyale's triumphant sneer. He was no knife fighter. His weapon was the revolver. To agree was to walk to his slaughter, but to refuse was to condemn Chuli and mark himself a liar and a coward, guaranteeing his death and possibly a massacre. The entire hidden valley held its breath, waiting for the word of the solitary cowboy. The circle cleared. Goyale drew a long, curved skinning knife from his belt, its edge gleaming dully in the morning light. Elias had only his shorter Bowie knife. The disparity was laughable. This was not a fight. It was an execution. But as Elias stepped forward, Chuli's voice cut through the silence with a desperate, final claim. The boy had a metal cross on a thong around his neck, she shouted in Spanish, then repeated it in Apache. The effect was instantaneous. Goyale froze. Nanton's head snapped toward her. A murmur of confusion rippled through the band. Elias didn't understand. What did a cross matter? Chuli pushed forward, her strength returning in a surge of adrenaline. He traded for it with a Mexican scout weeks before he got sick. He wore it under his shirt. He showed me. I told him to put it away, that the metal could hold bad spirits. He did not listen. The sickness was in his lungs and throat, but the fever, the madness of the fever came from the poison in the metal. She was speaking of lead. The crude cross, likely traded from a contaminated bullet pouch or a cheap solder, had been licked or sucked on by the boy. Lead poisoning causes severe neurological symptoms, delirium, agitation, pain, that would have looked like a curse or potent poison enhancing the smallpox. Goyale stared at her, his rage momentarily stalled by this bizarre, specific detail. He had not known about the cross. His son had kept it hidden, a secret from his father. The revelation cracked the certainty of his vengeance. Nanton seized the moment. The test is answered, but the truth is clouded. The white man's metal sickness is a known devil. This changes the woman's debt. He turned to Goyale. Your fight is with the sickness, not her, and not with this man who only saw suffering. But the crack in Goyale's resolve sealed over just as quickly. The shame of not knowing his son's secret, the public doubt cast on his judgment, it all fermented into a darker, more personal fury. He pointed his knife at Elias. He is the source of the white man's sickness. He is here. The metal, the smallpox, the soldiers following his trail, they are all part of the same storm. I will cut it out. The fight was back on. No more interruptions. The two men circled each other in the dusty arena. Goyale moved with a panther's grace, light on his feet. Elias was heavier, slower, his movements those of a brawler used to saloon fights, not knife duels. Goyale lunged first, a faint low that became a slash high. Elias jerked back, feeling the wind of the blade pass his cheek. He stumbled off balance. The warriors watching murmured, this would be short. Elias knew he couldn't match skill. He had to change the game. He remembered something an old trail boss once said, when you're outclassed, make the fight ugly. Make it about weight and hurt, not art. On Goyale's next lunge, Elias didn't try to parry with his knife. He dropped his shoulder and charged forward, inside the arc of the longer blade, taking a shallow cut across his upper arm but colliding bodily with the Apache warrior. They crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust, a tangle of limbs. It became a brutal, close-quarters struggle. No elegant knife work, just grunting, punching, gouging. Elias used his weight to pin Goyale's knife arm, gripping the man's wrist with a desperate strength. Goyale bucked and twisted, his free hand clawing at Elias' face. They rolled over and over, each fighting for a single decisive position. Elias' world narrowed to the strain in his muscles, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, the terrifying strength of the man beneath him. He saw the hatred in Goyale's eyes, a hatred so pure it was almost sacred. And in that moment, Elias understood the man completely. This wasn't about a test or tribal law. This was a father's grief screaming for an outlet, any outlet. With a final heave, Elias rolled on top, pinning Goyale's knife hand to the dirt with his knee. He raised his own Bowie knife, poised for a killing thrust to the chest. The camp was utterly silent. This was the moment. Justice, revenge, mercy, all distilled into one downward plunge. Elias looked from Goyale's defiant, waiting eyes to the faces of the band. He saw Nanton's closed expression. He saw the horrified hope on Chuli's face. He saw the children peering between adults' legs. He couldn't do it. He had killed before in the heat of a gunfight, but this was different. This was an execution, and he had started all of this by rejecting an execution. To become an executioner now would make a mockery of everything that had brought him here. With a cry of frustration that was almost a sob, Elias flipped the knife in his hand and brought the heavy brass pommel down hard on the side of Goyale's head. The warrior's body went limp. Elias staggered to his feet, bleeding, gasping for air. He dropped his knife into the dirt at Nanton's feet. "I'm not your storm," he panted, "and I won't be your killer." For a long moment, no one moved. Then two things happened at once. Goyale groaned, stirring back to consciousness. He was alive. And from the eastern rim of the valley, a single gunshot echoed, flat and wrong in the quiet air. A sentry's warning shot. The cavalry had found them. Chaos is a tool. It reveals truth. In the calm, the band had been divided. In the chaos of imminent attack, they became one organism. Nanton's voice rose, sharp with command. Women ran to gather children and sacred bundles. Men grabbed rifles and bows, scrambling for defensive positions on the rocky slopes. The test, the fight, the debate, all were rendered irrelevant by the immediate threat of the 24th Infantry. Elias stood in the suddenly empty circle, abandoned. He saw Chuli being pulled away by the older women. He saw Nanton directing warriors, his back turned. He was free. In the confusion, he could grab his horse, which was still tethered near the creek, and run. The Apache would be too busy fighting the cavalry to pursue him. It was the escape he'd been dreaming of for days. He took a step toward the creek, then stopped. He looked at the panicking camp, at the children being rushed to hiding places. He had brought this here. His flight had drawn the soldiers like wolves to a scent. To run now would be to complete Goyale's prophecy. He would be the bait that doomed them all. A young warrior, one of his previous guards, ran past, clutching an old Spencer rifle. Elias grabbed his arm. "Where?" "Nanton, the elder." The boy gestured wildly toward the north slope, before shaking free and running on. Elias found Nanton overseeing the placement of riflemen behind a natural rock rampart. The old man looked at him, expecting a plea for a horse, for freedom. "You need to break camp and run now," Elias said, his voice urgent. "That's a full patrol. They have a cannon. I've seen their columns. You can't hold this valley." "We know this land. We can bleed them," Nanton replied, his eyes hard. "And how many of your people will bleed out before they leave? They want me. Use that." Nanton stared at him, understanding dawning. "You would give yourself to them." "No," Elias said, a reckless plan forming as he spoke. "I'll lead them on a chase, buy you time to get everyone out. Give me 3 men who know the back trails. We'll make noise, show ourselves, then lead the cavalry on a goose chase into the maze canyons to the south. While they're chasing ghosts, you move the band north into the high passes." It was the same offer he'd made 10 years ago for the women in the story, the distraction play. But this time, the stakes were the survival of an entire band. Nanton searched his face. The test was back on, more brutal than the first. "Why?" Elias gave the only answer left. "Because I'm already dead if I run south alone, and because this is my fault. Let me fix it." From behind Nanton, a rough voice spoke. Goyale stood there, a fresh cut on his temple, his eyes bloodshot but clear. He had heard everything. He looked at Elias, not with hatred now, but with the cold calculation of a warrior assessing a tactical asset. "The white man is right. It is a good plan. I will lead the decoys." The offer was staggering. Nanton nodded slowly. "Take Loco and Bichet. Go. We will be ghosts within the hour." There was no time for farewells. Elias retrieved his horse and his rifle. Goyale and 2 other warriors mounted up, their faces grimly eager for this different kind of fight. As they rode for the southern pass at a gallop, intentionally kicking up dust, Elias looked back once. He saw Chuli standing by her wickiup, watching him go. She raised a hand, a faint gesture against the backdrop of frantic movement. Then she turned and helped an old woman carry a bundle. The 4 riders burst out of the southern end of the valley, whooping and firing their rifles into the air. As Elias had hoped, the cavalry patrol, which was cautiously advancing in a skirmish line, immediately wheeled and gave chase. The lieutenant in command saw exactly what he was meant to see: the fugitive cowboy Elias Beckett fleeing with a handful of hostiles. The chase was on. Elias, riding beside the man who minutes before had tried to kill him, felt a wild, desperate freedom. They led the soldiers on a twisting, turning pursuit through dry washes and over rocky shelves, always staying just in sight. Goyale and his men knew every twist, every dead end that wasn't a dead end for them. They split up and regrouped, using canyon echoes to sound like a larger force. For 2 hours they played this deadly game, but the cavalry was persistent and well-mounted. During a frantic gallop across a wide, open basin, a bullet meant for Goyale struck his horse. The animal went down screaming, throwing the warrior hard into the rocky ground. Elias didn't hesitate. He wheeled his mare around and rode back into the line of fire, reaching down an arm. Goyale, dazed but moving, grabbed it and swung up behind him. The 2 other Apache warriors covered their retreat with a volley of covering fire, driving the soldiers to take cover. With 2 riders, Elias' horse was slowed. The gap closed. They reached a narrow slot canyon, the entrance barely wide enough for a horse. "In here," Goyale shouted. They plunged into the cool, dark shadows. It was a trap, but for whom? The canyon wound deeper, then opened into a small, boxed amphitheater with sheer walls. A dead end. They had led the cavalry into a kill zone, but they themselves were now trapped. The soldiers dismounted at the canyon mouth, advancing on foot, using the rocks for cover. The lieutenant called out, "Beckett, throw down your arms and send out the hostiles. This is your last chance." Elias and Goyale crouched behind a large boulder, their rifles aimed at the entrance. They were outnumbered 5-1, with no retreat. The 2 other Apache warriors were positioned on the opposite side of the opening. Goyale looked at Elias, a grim, almost respectful smile on his face. "The elder's test is over. Now we see the quality of the man in the fight. You fight well for a white man." Elias chambered around. "You don't fight so bad yourself, for a man who just lost a knife fight." For the first time, Goyale let out a short, sharp laugh. Then he peered around the boulder. "They come." The first soldier stepped into the opening, and the world exploded, but not from their rifles. From high on the canyon walls above the entrance, a rain of rocks and gunfire erupted. Not from the cavalry's direction, but from behind them. The soldiers shouted in panic and confusion, trapped in a crossfire from an unseen force above. Nanton had not fled. He had repositioned his entire fighting force on the high ground. The decoy had worked, but the elder had no intention of sacrificing the decoys. He had turned the hunters into the prey. The brief, fierce fight was one-sided. Caught in the narrow entrance, the cavalry patrol was pinned. Their lieutenant, seeing the hopelessness, shouted for a retreat. They scrambled back to their horses, leaving 2 wounded behind, and galloped away, pursued by a few final, taunting shots from the ridges. Silence returned to the box canyon, broken only by the moans of the wounded soldiers. Elias slowly stood up from behind the boulder. On the canyon rim above, figures appeared. Nanton looked down, then gestured. A rope ladder was thrown over the side. Elias and Goyale climbed out of the trap, back into the sunlight. The Apache band was all there, whole and victorious. The camp had been broken, but the people had not run. They had fought for their own. Nanton approached Elias. He looked at the bloody cut on Elias' arm, the dust and grime, and then at Goyale standing silently beside him. "The band is safe. The soldiers will not return soon. Your debt is paid, more than paid." He then spoke to Goyale in Apache. The warrior listened, nodded once, and then turned to Elias. He spoke in slow, careful Spanish. "You fought with honor. You came back for me. You are not the storm. You are a strange wind. I do not understand you, but I will not raise my hand to you again." It was the closest to an apology and acceptance he would ever give. The conflict that had driven the entire ordeal was finally, truly over. As the band regrouped to tend their own and the surprisingly merciful task of caring for the wounded soldiers, Elias felt a profound exhaustion. The running was done. The fighting was done. He had nowhere to go, and for the first time he didn't feel the urge to flee. He looked out over the band, now setting up a temporary camp in this new location, and realized the unimaginable. He was, in some alien way, home. And that's when the true consequence of his journey finally descended upon him. The band made a new camp in a higher, more defensible canyon. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. Elias was no longer the white man. He was Beckett, or simply Elias. He worked not as a captive or a guest, but as one of the people. He helped build brush shelters, tended the horses with goyale, and learned to set snares for rabbits. The two wounded cavalry soldiers were treated with a mixture of practical care and distant suspicion. Their wounds were cleaned and bound with medicinal poultices prepared by Chuli. Once they could travel, they were given water, a little food, and pointed toward the distant Fort Huachuca. They were sent away unarmed, a message in itself. Nanton's mercy had limits, but it existed. The soldiers, expecting torture or execution, stumbled away in bewildered gratitude. They would carry a story back to the fort that would complicate the simple narrative of hostiles and fugitives. For Elias, the rhythm of this new life was a strange medicine. The constant anxiety of the hunted began to seep away, replaced by the tangible tasks of survival. He learned words in Apache, starting with the names for things: rock, water, horse, fire. The children became his most patient teachers, giggling at his clumsy pronunciation. His connection with Chuli deepened in quiet ways. They would walk together when she gathered herbs, and she would explain the uses of each plant, which one numbed pain, which one fought infection, which one should never be taken by a pregnant woman. He, in turn, told her about Texas, about cattle drives, about the stupid quarrel over stolen cows that had turned deadly and made him a fugitive. He told her about Sarah, his sister. Speaking the memory aloud to someone who listened without pity, but with understanding, felt like lancing a wound that had festered for 20 years. One evening, Nanton called him to sit by his fire. The old man was repairing a bridle. "You have a place here, Elias Beckett, for as long as you want it, but you must understand what that means. The soldiers know your face. They know you are with us. You will be on their posters not just as a murderer, but as an Indian sympathizer, a renegade. There will be no going back to your world. To choose this life is to burn that bridge forever." Elias stared into the flames. The world he was leaving behind was a world of wanted posters, of suspicious glances in dusty towns, of sleeping with one eye open. The world he was being offered was one of shared labor, of clear stars at night, of a purpose that grew from a single act of mercy. It was not an easy life, but for the first time, it felt like an honest one. "My world tried to kill me long before I came here," Elias said finally. "This place, it let me live. I think I'll stay." Nanton nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then there is something you should know. The test is over, but honor remains. You saved a life. You fought for the band. You have nothing, but you have given much. It is not our way to let a man who has given so much have nothing in return." Elias frowned, not understanding. The next morning he understood. The entire band gathered. Nanton stood in the center with Chuli beside him, dressed in a beautifully beaded dress of white buckskin. Her hair was woven with fresh flowers. She looked at Elias, her expression serene but her eyes shining. Nanton spoke in a formal tone, then translated for Elias. "Elias Beckett, you took a life into your hands, you protected it, you fought for it. You have shown your heart is straight and your courage is strong. The band accepts you, but a life cannot float alone, it must be anchored." He gestured to Chuli. "Chuli's life, which you hold, she now offers to join with yours. If you accept, you will be bound not just to her, but to the band as a son and a brother. You will have responsibilities. You will have family. This is our way." It was a proposal, a marriage offer, but it was more than that. It was adoption, naturalization. It was the only way a man like him could truly belong. Elias looked at Chuli. He thought of the exhausted, defiant woman at the punishment post. He thought of her intelligent eyes explaining herbs, her strength in the face of accusation, the quiet solidarity they had built. This wasn't a whirlwind romance from a storybook. It was something firmer, rooted in shared survival and mutual respect. It was a foundation. He stepped forward. He took Chuli's hands as she had once taken his in the dust of the canyon. "Yes," he said, clear and firm. Then he repeated the word in his newly learned Apache. "Ao." The celebration that followed was modest but deeply felt. There was food, venison roasted with wild onions, flatbread baked on hot stones, a bitter, fragrant tea. There was music from a single drum and chanting. Goyale, keeping his word, brought Elias a gift, a finely crafted knife sheath to replace the one lost in the fight. It was an act of closure. That night, Elias and Chuli sat outside the small wickiup that was now theirs. The future was uncertain. The cavalry would still patrol. Winters would be hard. The band would always be moving. But for the first time in his life, Elias was not facing it alone. A week later, the band prepared to move again. Scouts had reported increased patrol activity to the south. They would head deeper into the Sierra Madre, following ancient trails into Mexico. As Elias packed his few possessions, his rifle, his now empty saddlebags, his new sheath, Chuli brought him a small deerskin pouch. "This is for you," she said, "to wear." Inside the pouch was the object that had started it all, the small, crude lead cross her nephew had worn. She had retrieved it after the boy's burial. "It is a reminder," she said, "of the poison that comes from misunderstanding, and of the truth that can set you free." Elias tied the thong around his neck, letting the cold metal cross rest against his skin. It was not a symbol of faith, but of memory, a reminder of the fragile line between poison and medicine, between vengeance and justice, between a death sentence and a new life. As the band rode out single file along a narrow mountain trail, Elias took his place among them. He rode beside Chuli. Ahead, Goyale scouted the path. Behind, Nanton watched the back trail. Elias Beckett, the fugitive cowboy, was gone. In his place was a man with a new name, a new family, and a story that would one day become a legend whispered around fires. A story about 30 warriors on a ridge, a woman at a post, and the drop of rain that refused to be swallowed by the desert. But the most surprising detail of all, one he would not learn for many years, was this. The cavalry lieutenant they had defeated, humiliated by losing his prisoners and being bested by Apache, filed a misleading report. He wrote that the fugitive Elias Beckett had been killed in the engagement. The wanted posters slowly came down. The man he had been was officially dead, and the man he had become could finally, truly, begin to live. So what became of the man who passed the hidden test? The historical record, focused on generals and battles, is silent. But in the oral traditions of the Chiricahua, a story persists about a pale-eyed brother who came from the desert, was judged by the people, and chose to stay. The Apache Wars would rage for several more years, ending with the final surrender of Geronimo in 1886. Most of the Chiricahua were forcibly removed to distant reservations in Florida and Alabama. But some bands, like Nanton's, simply vanished into the vastness of the Sierra Madre, their final fate untracked by census takers or cavalry reports. It is likely Elias Beckett, or whatever name he took, lived out his days in those mountains, his past erased, his future woven into the fabric of a people who had tested and then kept him. This story is more than a frontier rescue tale. It is a parable about observation and judgment. 30 warriors on a ridge were not just witnesses, they were a jury. Their test was not about bravery with a gun, but compassion with a knife. In a landscape defined by mutual hatred, they created a single, strange experiment to see if goodness still existed in their enemy's world. And one man, running from his own demons, accidentally answered yes. It makes you wonder, how many hidden tests do we all face? Not with warriors on cliffs, but in everyday moments where our character is observed and judged when we think no one is looking. the choice to help or to turn away, to stand on principle or to slide into convenience. History is built on these quiet, unrecorded verdicts. The legend of the 30 warriors and the cowboy endures because it taps into a deep hope that our moral choices matter, that they are seen, and that they can, against all odds, rewrite the story we've been given. Elias Beckett went into that canyon a fugitive. He came out a made man, all because he saw a person where the world saw a problem, and he chose the harder right over the easier wrong. If you found yourself in his worn boots, seeing those vultures circling, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more journeys into the forgotten corners of history where one decision changed everything, make sure to subscribe. We have so many more stories to tell. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most important trials don't happen in a courtroom. They happen in a desert under a punishing sun, with your heart as the only guide.